Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the second session of our Reclaiming Agency series. We started off this morning with a focus on the business community and how business can flourish and survive in this time of crisis. This afternoon, we're focusing on education. Many of you will know that education is very close to my heart, and today we are absolutely thrilled to have an esteemed group of panelists who will be taken through their paces by Professor Sean Viljoen, who is the facilitator for today. Sean Viljoen teaches South African and African literature. He has a particular interest in queer biography and memoir, and he's the author of the book Richard Reeve, A Partial Biography, shortlisted for the Alan Paton Prize for Nonfiction. He is an associate professor in the English department at Stellenbosch University. Welcome to you, Sean, and thank you very much for running the session for us today. In your hands.
Thank you, Noel, and welcome to the audience here, welcome to those who are watching us from afar, and welcome to the panelists who are all here in the flesh. A really nice feeling to have you up front here. I'm going to introduce the panelists, and then I'm going to just make a few brief remarks to lead us into 3 rounds of questions which I will pose to each of the panelists. And after those 3 rounds, we'll open it up for discussion. Right on my right is Nomvulazana Ngele, who was born in Cape Town during the early 60s. Due to the Group Areas Act of 1950, she and her family moved from Retreat to, I'm interested to, I've never seen it, Iguguletu, in 1967. Nomvulazana attended school in Cape Town and completed a tertiary education at Fort Beaufort, where she trained as a junior primary school teacher. In 1990, she began a career at Imbasa Primary School, where 30 years later, you still are. She loves working with people, especially children, and is a coordinator of the Pastoral Care Committee at her workplace, where she works to raise funds to fight HIV/AIDS. She works very closely with students that come from Marquette University, and which is part of a UWC exchange program. She loves traditional music, dancing, storytelling, gardening, and debate. And her strongest skills that she enjoys is sharing things with listeners. She believes that South Africa is still the best country in the world and has high hopes for the next generation to make this world a better place to live in for all. Kyle Saville on my far right, youngest member of the panel, 19 years old, was raised, interestingly, in a Montessori environment from the age of 3 years old, gesout in Montessori. Thereafter, left to go to a public high school for 2 years and returned to Generation School in Amanus to do the Cambridge curriculum and returned to the Montessori way of doing things. He finished school following a PSI pathway. I'm not sure what a PSI pathway is.
It's one of Generation School's alternative methods of completing your level 4 qualification, equivalent to a matric. So it's mainly focused in business and that field, yes.
Thank you. And then is doing an exit diploma in business management, and for which he received a distinction. He's recently completed his Cambridge Advanced Studies Maths and English examination, which while simultaneously doing his first year through Cornerstone, and at Cornerstone, I gather you're doing a BCom. Throughout his years at school, he's always been seen by his peers as an example to follow, a person who students could trust And in these relationships, his peers started to associate him as a leader. The school does not have titles such as student leader, most interesting. So students would trust him with their thoughts, opinions, and he would always try his best to assist them. Many times students would be battling with their studies and he would assist them in preparing for tests. And then he also says in his bio that during his school career he took part in Maths Olympiads at UCT, got through to the second round, and received a Maria Montessori Shield that's awarded to students that encompass all 6 pillars of the Montessori philosophy. He also takes part in an Interact Club, which is an outreach project for disadvantaged children. And lastly, since a young age, he's been intrigued by photography, and so is also a photographer. And then lastly, Zubaida Desai. Zubaida Desai and I started teaching together at Cathkin High almost about 1979, 40 years ago, longer. She was till recently the Dean of Education at the University of the Western Cape, and from which she's now formally retired, but she's still very active and is currently extraordinary professor in the Department of Language Education in the Education faculty, which she headed all those years, I think for 2 terms. Zubaida has extensive experience of working with teacher trainees, specializing in language teaching, as well as high school teaching. She has published widely in the field of language in education policy, and she's inspired many a student to reach for the stars. I must add, though, that the field she's talking about in language policy is really a very crucial one. She works in the area of mother tongue education and how crucial that is in the early phases of a student's life for knowledge, for learning and teaching. So I deliberately read these bios at length because what I'm hoping we do here today is not talk about school leadership in an abstract way. You know, the attributes of a good leader are X, Y, and Z. I think that's vacuous. That's outside of a context. And you can see in these bios, all 3 of our participants here today really have played roles in very particular contexts. And I think leadership is about leadership in a context. So I'm hoping that what we do here, my dear panelists today, is that we talk about leadership often through stories, telling your stories. But also you might want to, for the last question I'm going to pose you, or at any point, talk about it in a more abstract or theoretical way. So let's start. If I can just try and very briefly say why this particular focus is part of the Reclaiming Agency 3 days. I think we're all in agreement that the education system we have and have had for the best part of the 20th century, particularly since the rise of apartheid, is completely dysfunctional and in fact does the opposite of what education should do largely. So it tries to indoctrinate rather than open up. That's what I think Bantu education was about under apartheid. Post-apartheid, I think education has been bungled by whoever's been in charge nationally, provincially. For example, this disastrous outcomes-based education that they try to implement schools is one. And the other is just the sheer bureaucratized nature of education that teachers and principals have to deal with. Yet, despite all of that, what we find in this country, we have what I call islands of excellence throughout the country, in urban and rural areas, where schools are functioning as the best schools in the world function. And I think one of the reasons for that, and there are many, one of the reasons is the nature of the leadership at the school, the leadership from the principal, from the teachers, from the students themselves, and from the community, the parents. So I'm hoping today we end up, after our exchange of stories and ideas, Shakira, the organizer of this event, also asked us to end off with some really practical suggestions to our audience here and afar as to what, in your minds, in your experience, really good leadership entails in your context or in our context. So, who wants to go first? I'm going to just maybe start as I started with the introductions. Noma, would you like to go? There's the mic. Sorry, Noma, the question that I'm posing to you is really, I've given some introduction of the speakers to all of you, but the first question I'm really posing to give us one or two examples of the most challenging moments you face or faced as a leader in your school or education environment and how you handled these.
Okay, thank you so much. If I may say, is it Sean I'm speaking to? And may I humbly greet the whole audience. I want to say to all of us, let's say, we are stayers in South Africa. I'm a stayer. What now I want to say, the role that is supposed to be played of leadership, especially in education. As a teacher, I'm experiencing a lot of problems, be it internally, that is at the school, be it from the department side, be it from the basic education department. Things are not run as before, especially since I started teaching before we got our first democratic I'm sorry. Can you just a moment pass to the next person? Sorry.
Okay, let's go on to Kyle. Well, Noma Buzalana, you just...
Same question.
Yes, the same question I'm asking to all three panelists.
So in my personal experience, I haven't been alive for as long as the rest of the panelists on my side, but something that I've encountered multiple times in my schooling career is the relationship between students and lecturers or teachers. Being an unofficial leader in my school environment, students often come to me with problems that they might have or suggestions, and carrying that through to lecturers or to teachers or people with leadership roles is not always easy, as you can't portray the students' vision as they see it. So you try your best as a leader or their role model to portray this, but the gap between students and lecturers, I would say, I think that is one of the major issues. I'm fortunate enough to see that in our school, Generation Schools, the relationship established between lecturers and students is far different to any other educational institute that I've come across. There's a more, we refer to each other as a family, so there's a familiar culture that's developed among everybody, and This makes it easier for just the flow of ideas, any concerns that students bring up for to be addressed, and sometimes the best ideas come from students. Another example of an issue that I've come across is where you are both friends with the students, or you're familiar with students as well as teachers, and there is conflict between students and teachers. So you try and be the middle party, trying to see things from both sides. But I feel that, in my experience, I've found that you need to first wait until the facts are set out straight from both sides, and act as a neutral party until you can see, okay, this member was in the wrong, or they misinterpreted something. So I think communication and having substantial information supporting arguments is very vital in a school environment.
Thank you.
Everybody. Before I address the question, I just wanted to make one comment, and that is that you don't need to be in a leadership position to lead. And I'll give an example of that. In 1985, I was teaching at Katkenai. Sean wasn't there, he'd gone to study in England. And the staff were mainly members of the Western Cape Teachers Union. And we were debating quite vehemently whether we should proceed with the exams, knowing that we hadn't taught our students for almost 6 months. And at that stage, the staff was almost united, the 42 staff members. We didn't want to administer the exams. Then the next day, the deputy principal, or the acting principal at the time, called me into his office and said to me that the teachers are complaining that I'm talking too much and they don't have an opportunity to have their say. And so they feel they're being bullied into a position. So I said, I'm sorry if they think that. When you ask for comments and I raise my hand and I get a chance to speak. But fine, I will bear that in mind. The next staff meeting that was called lasted for 10 minutes. Nobody spoke. But in the end, out of the 42 teachers, 26 decided not to administer the exams and 16 did. But there was a moral and ethical side to leadership there that we often forget about, you see. So it's not just about position, it's also about morality. And I think we need to bear that in mind. When I became the dean at UWC of Education in 2007, my desire was to move beyond mediocrity. There was a perception at the time that to reward top achievers is bourgeois, is middle class. Because top achievers normally come from rich homes, privileged homes, so you mustn't reward them. And I fought that position, and I instituted the Dean's Merit List from 2007. In 2007, there were 19 students out of 2,000 who had either graduated cum laude or summa cum laude, or who had an aggregate of 75% in their first to third years. In 2016, the year that my 10th year as dean, there were 115 students who were on that list, from 19 to 115. And what was lovely about this occasion was that we used to take photographs of the students and their family members, and these were outside my door in the corridor. And whenever I used to pass these photographs, there were students milling around these photographs saying, I want to be there. And that motivated them. So I think it's important to motivate students. There's a similar experience that I had at UWC when I wasn't the dean, long before I was the dean. When the deputy dean called me in, I had failed a student. I was teaching the English method course to the PGCE. At that stage, it was called the Higher Diploma in Education students, and he had failed. He had written a supplementary, he failed the supplementary. The deputy dean called me in and said, he's got a child, he needs to start working. So I said, I am thinking about the children he's going to teach. If he can't string a sentence together, how on earth is he going to teach English? And I stood by my guns. And his comment was, she's worse than the whites. She's so strict. I'll stop.
Thanks. Noma, would you like to say something about leadership at schools?
Okay. When I'm about talk about leadership. I want to say the school I'm teaching at, Imbasa, I've been teaching there for more than, this is my 30th year. I started there 1990. Concerning leadership, it's hard to lead adults. Adults who've got most instances selfish, ulterior motivations. And especially as I'm teaching at Old Crossroad to the parents' children, children of the poor, of the poorest. And I, as an educated or a professional, I'm at liberty to manage to take my children to I won't say to a private school, but to school, usually we say across the railway line, because we can afford. Then as I was acting since 2014 as a head of department, there was one instance where teachers were supposed to be on strike. However, unfortunately, the children that attends our school are from the community of Old Crossroad, from Philippi area, from Marcus Gava, and especially from the shelters, the shacks around KTC and Lower Crossroad. So the teachers were excited over the weekend, as on a Monday, teachers were going to be on strike. And mostly at our school, the teachers union that is of the majority is SATU, that is the South African Democratic Teachers Union. So before the weekend, no one thought that to inform parents that by 9 o'clock, teachers will not be at school. So fortunately, principal called us first, and we had to think some of the children come with transport, some of the children, there are no parents. So principal here, couldn't you be firm or be straightforward? But my concern was for the children's safety, because internally I am the coordinator of HIV and AIDS committee, and I know of instances where some girls will come to me and report what have happened to them over the weekend, what have happened even when parents were not there. So I've said to teachers, rather than all more than 50% of the teachers going on strike, can't half of us stay behind and consider the well-being of these children? It was like, for the first time, I'm speaking or talking against my organization. That is, I'm a SATU member also. Then I've said some of these learners, when they go home, the parents are not there. Some of them, the transport drivers didn't know that they must come, because actually the march was going to start in town by 10 o'clock. So none of the learners went home with letters from school. So I had even to send my ground there and said, let's think of the safety of these children, and except that we are depriving them to be thought most importantly to me, my concern is their safety. So on that day, we were divided. But what I like, when everyone looked back, we realized that at the end of the day, we'll be accountable, not only to the parents, even to the community at large and to the society. So when you are in leadership, you must not always go with the flow. Sometimes you must be against the flow or the tide. It's not about to be liked, but it also with me deals mostly with one's conscience. On another instance, there is this thing, as I've said, there is the basic education, and according to province, we differ. Usually, here in the Western Cape, I find that we as teachers, we are mostly oppressed and depressed. There is little contact for us with the learners. But I don't know what image the Western Cape Department wants to portray, because what is happening here in the Western Cape, there is this systematic exams that are done by the grade 3s, the grade 6, the grade 9s. And then with our other colleagues in other provinces, for instance, in the Eastern Cape, they are not doing this thing. And in order for you to appear to be a good or this best teacher, the school must pass above 50%. So usually at our school, at Old Cross Road, we were not performing so well. So I also said to the principal, it might be also we must consider the background of our learners, where they come from. So there was a time, I think that was 2013, then when SATU and the teachers were saying, away with this systematic, because it is not like a fair test. Even the concept, then I was teaching grade 6, the content of the language that comes out of those stories is not familiar to stories of the environment where our learners from locally are coming from. But also on that day, one of the teachers said he is not going to allow, and the learners for the first time when it's these systematic exams, they will be supervised by external supervisors. It won't be their teachers. So this one teacher said, and you've got to take off your teaching aids on the walls and all that. So they can't write if those teaching aids are there. Then this teacher now in 6B did not prepare her class so that the exams can continue. Again, these invigilators went to the principal. The class is not ready for the learners to write. The principal asked, how come? Then this external examiner, invigilator said, the pictures are still there, and when we entered the classroom, the teacher just marched out. Then now, principal called the teacher, and the other grades have already started. Also in that instance, the challenge was that now we've got to call the teacher. I called the teacher and asked, teacher, why did you not prepare the classroom so that the exams can proceed? The teacher just said, I just went out with myself, but the learners are still there. If the examiner wants to continue, the learners can write here. Here also we've had to try and speak with the teacher to convince him that he is depriving learners here again to an exposure that maybe his or her child is getting that opportunity. So at times it's hard because it's also causing a tension between myself and my colleague at the end of the day, that I'm not favoring him or I'm not supporting him, but it's really hard to be in management. You've got to forget about yourself, but consider mostly as we are there for the interest of the children. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Nombulazana. I'm not going to ask my additional questions. I'm going to ask us to busk now. Any of the panelists want to talk to anything you've raised, and then we'll open it to the floor. But what I found most interesting is almost there are 3 E's that have come up with regard to leadership here. Carl's talk of the need for a particular ethos to be created at schools. Zubaida, for questions about the ethics of leadership. And Amazana, you about empathy with students and colleagues, especially given the background that in which your students are located. To any of the panelists, I think let's tease out some of these or add to it, but from the floor or from the panelists, Zubaida, your hands up. Anybody else?
I just wanted to respond to something that Carl said about the tension between the lecturers and the students, the teachers and the pupils. When I was teaching at Katkanai, the school was a drab school. And so what I did, we had our own classrooms and the pupils would move around. So what I did, I had an uncle who worked as a travel agent, so I got lovely pictures and I put these pictures up on the wall. What happened then is that there'd be all kinds of graffiti on this. There'd be all kinds of graffiti on the posters, and I was very disappointed. Then I addressed the students and I said to them, this is what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to make the classroom a pleasant place to be in. And students have, not necessarily those students, but other students who also come there, you're trying to destroy these posters. So what I'm going to do, so they said, but we want to write something. So I said, okay, I will have a section there which will be a blank piece of paper. And you can write whatever you want to on there. Can we swear? So if you want to swear, you can swear. That's your indaba. And initially they did swear, but after a while they started writing very apt sayings about education. And so what I'm saying is that sometimes one can negotiate a kind of relationship. And I used to do that with my UWC students. I used to say, we're going to form a contract. This is what I expect. What do you expect? And generally, when you give them the course outline and tell them what would they like to add, what would they like to take away, the only thing is too many assessments, but they don't want to add anything. So it's giving them the permission and the space to be able to make their contribution does help to break that kind of tension.
Anyone from the floor at this stage? You know, something that's also striking me listening to all three of our panelists, we're not hearing the big things you see in textbooks, you know, attributes of a good leader, kind of initiative, and so the list goes on. It's embodied in their stories, in what they do, in little things. Leadership is not about the grand schemes. Leadership's also about those singular moments when you have to take the lead. You have to help show the way. If I can just add to the thinking about leadership, something very different to the political leadership, Zubaida, which inspired us as young teachers who were intent on being missionaries in the schools in the post-76 period. We were teachers. We were going to teach our subjects damn well. But we were also going to teach to raise consciousness, to fight racism and apartheid at the school level. And you know, Zubaida knows we did a lot of that politicization, but it reached the point where one student said to me, after I'd handed out a comprehension, which I set up the night before on my typewriter on a stencil that with red correcting ink, I devised a comprehension on a film that was very popular at the time, Midnight Express. And it was an American film about American being hijacked, I think in Turkey, and it was extremely phobic about Islam. The reviews in the papers didn't say that. It was a very dramatic film that people loved. And I said that, and the students had to work through this, and I'm trying to through this to raise consciousness. But one student came to me afterwards and said, "Sir, it's always politics, politics, politics. Can't we do something on soccer?" And, you know, I never forget that because, you know, as a leader, I thought my job was that. But I wasn't listening to what the students were also wanting. You know, so it's the listening that we have to do in these positions that is so, so crucial. Lastly, if I could add this other thing about a non-political question of leadership. When I went to Hewitt after Cathkin to teach English and maths method, I think that most of my students passing through my 10 years, they don't remember much of what I taught them, the student teachers. Where I think I did sow seeds was I ran an extramural hiking club and took them up the mountain on day trips and overnight hikes. So many of them started hiking clubs at their school. And that kind of practical exercise is a wonderful way of talking about the world while creating a community. And I think if I think of my legacy at my 10 years at Hewitt College, it's, introducing many young pre-service teachers to hiking. From the floor, is that Shakira a question online?
I have a question, if I may. In South Africa, we have so many different cultures, so many different languages, and so many different people. Yet we only have one curriculum. As leaders in education, have you ever found that there has been a clash between your culture and the curriculum that you are mandated to teach? And how have you overcome that? How have you reconciled that? How have you been able to make that work?
Anyone want Zubaida first and then?
It was more, we did that a lot of that during the apartheid years. There was the curriculum, and this is what we taught behind closed doors. But we also told them that in terms of the exams, you need to know this and that and the other, but this is what the real history is about. And fortunately, nobody actually squealed on us, but there were schools where pupils would then tell their parents about it, and the teachers would get into trouble. But at the schools that I taught, that didn't happen, except when I was teaching in Mitchell's Plain. One irate parent came to the school. I had set an exam paper, and she said, "There's nothing that my child could write about. It's all about politics and gender and feminism." So I said, "What about the neighbors in the street?" There was something about neighbors in the street. And she, "We don't worry with the neighbors." So there is opportunity to do that.
Thanks.
Okay, the clash of curriculum and culture. In late 1998, I was teaching life skills. There, as I was teaching life skills, we were teaching the learners about their body parts and about sexual awareness and abuse. So this one learner went home and told the mother, in Xhosa they say, she's been taught amanyala, meaning that that's a taboo language. Then I had to take, especially during my lessons of HIV and AIDS, where I had to dwell specifically how a person gets infected or how people are affected. And I still remember even this Lena's mother, I nearly called her name, she came and confront me. I had to show the textbook that it's not coming out of me. Then she said at her home, they don't speak those things. She thinks her child is still young. Meanwhile, the requirement from the department was that the learners are supposed to know about these things of HIV and AIDS, the types of abuse, the physical abuse, the sexual abuse, and the learners, their private parts are not supposed to be touched. For a long time, a lot of parents used to come to school until we've got to show them that it's not what we want to teach, but it is prescribed by the department. So there's also that difficulty, and most of the parents culturally, they didn't want that their children be taught even at grade 6 by male teachers. They prefer their children to be in a class of a lady teacher. Then we would say, because we are doing subject teaching, most of the teaching that goes into the class for maths or natural science and technology are mostly like male teachers, but we as females will be teaching, say, the languages and so forth. But there was that thing of a clash between culturally that we are not teaching the learners like good manners, and the children will come and speak about their body parts at home, and the parents will be like, at school they are taught rude manners and all that. So there is a lot of that took place. But at least only recently from 2000 that we don't get that confrontationally, because the learners that I'm presently teaching are children of students that I've taught. But before then, it was a lot of a problem. Thank you so much.
How do you deal with the new, I think it's life orientation curriculum, where we have to teach sexual orientation, more gender sensitive matters, personal sexuality.
Now, okay, on that note, that's why I'm saying now at least the learners are more open-minded, because recently, that was last year, these 12-year-olds that I'm teaching are actually supposed to be my grandchildren. So even myself, I do speak openly, like with children or family members that visit me. Fortunately or unfortunately for me, I don't have my own grandchildren. My firstborn at the moment is 28. My secondborn is 23. That's all that I've been blessed with. But I think television, the exposure of them being on cell phones because before I thought in 1989, 90, then there was not so much like social media issues. You know what happened last year, and it is a case that is still close to my heart, and it's still hurting me because the problem was not solved. You've asked, how do we deal with issues of sexual orientation to the learners at the present moment? How learners are observed. To start with, I'm teaching presently. Before COVID, I had 50 learners in a smaller classroom like this. I had 50. So even last year, I had 48 learners. So it's not easy. What I want first to highlight, to observe as Tandeka comes in, Sipo goes out, Nomonde goes to that group. You always is in contact with those learners that maybe are problematic, or those who outshine others. Ne? It's easy to notice them first. So this particular Monday morning, as the learners come in, then one learner asked to go outside to relieve herself. Then I heard a giggle. Then as they were laughing, this girl, her name is Lilita, she came and complained, "Teacher, they are laughing at me." Then I said, "Why?" And then she said, "This one boy, I as a teacher, or as I take myself, I always say to them, they must trust me, I'm their mother. I couldn't take notice." The boy said, "Lilita walks as somebody who have been raped." And then I had to call Lilita. You see, Lilita was noticed maybe by 11-year-old boy. Then I called Lilita aside, the girl, and said, and it's only then that I took notice that Lilita was limping for real. And then I asked this boy, "Why do you say Lilita is walking as somebody who've been raped? It's a case that is on, but due to COVID, it didn't continue the case." And then the boy said, "No, teacher, I can see how she's walking," and really that 11 or 12-year girl was walking badly. I called her aside, and then she related to me that as a family, they've went to visit. I'm just trying to make that really these youngsters are sexually aware or exposed. And then for real, this have happened. And on a sad note, this little girl was given liquor and she was raped by these African men from the African state. In the family, they had a family function. So I really want to tell you, they even know in terms of if a girl is on periods, it's like it's girls that menstruate. In the olden days, we didn't even know that. But they are really wise and wide-eyed opened. Thank you.
There's a question
Sorry.
on the floor.
I have a question for Kyle. Yeah. My question is, Kyle, earlier on you spoke about being a leader and being able to navigate the space between your peers and your teachers or the lecturers in your space. And I guess my question is, the age that you're at now and maybe a little bit younger, you know, when you, particularly a teenager around 16, 15, around that age, you have a lot of peer pressure that comes into play naturally in any environment, you know. And so as someone who's seen as a leader amongst your peers, when you have to be in a situation where you need to navigate between what the adults are saying and what your peers are saying, how do you stay level-headed in that space and continue to do what you think is right, even though it may potentially affect your relationship with your teachers or may potentially make your friends angry at you, or, you know, because they're saying you're taking the wrong side, or, yeah.
Well, I think ultimately, in the case of a teacher, everyone is human and can make a mistake. So what the teacher says might not necessarily be law. But again, I would say that it's, for me, it's got to do with intuition and what I have learned over the years, being brought up in a Montessori environment, the principles that we were taught from a very young age. I think that guided me into establishing what I would associate as correct and what is incorrect. For example, if I did not agree with a teacher or someone who was a higher authority than me, I would discuss it with them. Or if that wasn't resolved, I would take it to the next level if I felt strongly about it. But unfortunately, with students, they aren't necessarily as open-minded and level-headed as a more mature individual, so they might not understand that approach to that you would be taking, or how you're handling the situation. So they might be offended that you're not taking their side, or you're on the teacher's side. But I think ultimately, if you show no bias towards a student or a teacher, and you keep yourself neutral until an outcome is reached, there's no severe clashes. Yeah.
Kyle, can you keep the mic? Because following on from that, you know, when I read your bio, and it came to me now listening to you, I think you're an intuitive leader. And of course, when we say someone's an intuitive leader, intuition doesn't fall out of the sky or come in a gene in your body. You get it from somewhere. So you say you were immersed in the Montessori method and Montessori teachers. Was there something you got from the home?
Yes, I'm also fortunate enough that my mother, who is in the audience, she is also a qualified Montessori educator. So what I learned at school, I learned at home as well. So I think that I was fortunate enough to be fully immersed in that kind of environment. And I feel that the principles you learn from the Montessori way, it opens your intuitive part of your mind. For example, in certain situations, I'm more a person who sits back and analyze the situation before I jump to conclusions or pick sides. I first want to find out what the facts are. Why did this happen? Who's involved, before I come to my own conclusions. And I think it's got to do with the way that we are brought up from an early age. Yeah.
And the moment you lost it, lashed out, lost your cool, how did you deal with it?
So I'm fortunate enough that I have not lost my cool yet. I would consider myself quite a reserved person. I don't express frustration or anger explicitly. I would rather try and keep it in and first come to terms with it myself before I share it with anybody else. In the environment I was before high school, the Montessori environment, it was full-on Montessori. There was no CAP syllabus, there was no Cambridge curriculum. It was full-on Montessori from the 3 to 6 year olds. Practical life was a major component, and those 3 years are also the 3 years where students learn the most, and not necessarily in terms of knowledge and how can I say, theory. It's values, morals, and principles. And I remember we would have, this was a little project that our school had, the 6 pillars that we had. It's responsibility, respect, caring, fairness, trustworthiness, all of those. It was a project that was brought into the curriculum. So there was freedom for the teachers to embrace that into their curriculum. So there was a set curriculum, but pulling that into their curriculum and subtly just kind of forcing it onto them, it creates a different type of student. Then going from grade 7 into a government school, I was almost flooded with the way that I saw that other students behave. The school that I was at previously was a very small school. There was 90 students, and that's from the ages of 18 months up until 13 years, so it's a very small school. And then the high school I went to, there was nearly 900 students, so it's about 10 times the size. And I feel that something that I've missed from Montessori was the respect between a student and a teacher. At a Montessori school, we address the teachers by their names, their first names. So, I would call my mom Harriet, or the principal Karen, depending on who they are. But that doesn't show a lack of respect within in the school. That is just one of Montessori's principles. Going to the public school, obviously you dress as sir, ma'am, or whatever. There's still a respect that is deemed with that, their title, But I feel that it didn't have the same value as me addressing the teacher as Harriet or James or something like that. And then returning back to generation schools, which is also the old Montessori school, so it's Cambridge curriculum with the Montessori principles and values. I can see the difference between students who were brought up in the Montessori, with the Montessori way of doing things, and people that are coming in from other environments. I feel that there's a very, very distinct contrast between those students. And it's not necessarily because of the education system that they come from. It's just that they might not have had as much focus on those morals and values that I had in those crucial 3 years of my life. Yes.
Thank you, Carl. Values, morals, principles underpinning the leadership. And if we look at our country, at the world, people playing leading roles politically, in education, in all fields. There is so much, there's such a absence of ethical leadership based on those sorts of principles, morals, values. And I think that's something key we should keep in mind. We have a question from the live audience.
Thank you for the opportunity. Yes, I can completely relate to what Kyle is saying in terms of the morals and values, as such as integrity, of course, and leadership. It cannot stand apart. A student, for instance, that comes from a state school and a student that comes from a private school, of course, they are a very different curriculum, and although that student is not developed to focus on that morals and values or integrity as leadership, I wouldn't say go lost by the wayside, but there are other focuses as that student grow. So, however, and like you say, Sean, in a world that we're living, or in a country that we're living where, leadership is going hand in hand with unethical practices, we really need to come back to the focus of integrity, and bring that and bring that as a focus to where we want to take our leaders of the next generation, or the leaders of this generation. But what comes to mind also is when a student comes from a state or public school, and that student develops and goes into university, etc. And the panel has mentioned earlier on that one can very clearly identify a leader, right? The behavior, the way they participate, etc., engagement, etc., etc. So at university level, that student that comes from the state school has to work harder to prove their leadership skills, or to be recognized on certain platforms because of their background, right? So my question is, Zubaida, you earlier said about the Dean's List, which you have brought into the university, and that... Into the faculty, sorry. And that has brought, I think, a bit more focus on leaders that has previously been disadvantaged, and not just the education faculty, because arts faculty also, and I was one of the students that, thank God, made the Dean's List. However, you work harder than any other student to prove that leadership, and even from there onwards, the opportunities that come, scholarships that comes, etc., whether locally or abroad, you that comes from a disadvantaged background have to prove much harder than any other student the leadership. So as a leader and as experienced leaders that we look up to, what opportunities are there that the experienced leadership creates or can identify for those that still needs to get into those platforms?
There's something that, when Kyle was talking, I thought of, and that is that leaders need to be inclusive in the way they approach the students that they teach and the pupils that they teach. Earlier on, you mentioned the whole issue of cultures and languages. So, for example, most schools would have as a medium of instruction beyond grade 3 either English or Afrikaans. Now, but your children who are speaking other languages like isiZulu, isiXhosa, Setswana, etc. Now, how do you, as a teacher, knowing that they will be studying through English, make them feel welcome? So, one of the things I would do in my training teacher class is to tell them, try and find the word for thank you in as many languages as you can, and make a poster and put it at the back of your class. Or greetings, hello in different languages. And it's amazing how the students felt welcome after they saw their language. And recently I gave a talk at Stellenbosch University, and I did the same, said thank you in different languages. At the end of the talk, one of the students said to me, "You didn't use my language." So I said, "Which was your language?" He said, "Amharic." So I said, "Sorry, I didn't know how to say thank you in Amharic." And he showed me how to say it. So I think it's important to draw on people's languages. And then the other thing is that I don't think we should think that all students that come from state schools are weak, or leaderless, or rudderless. I don't think we should generalize. I think if you acknowledge students, and if you tell them what they're capable of, then they will show you. But if you expect very little from them, then they will produce very little. My profile picture as a poster, my WhatsApp profile picture as a poster which says, "Teachers who love teaching, teach children to love learning."
Say that again, Zubaida.
Teachers who love teaching, show children how to love learning.
That's lovely. Bulalani has a question.
Thank you very much. Zubaida, my question is again directed at you. We do know that schools don't develop policy. It is the government, the education department that does that. How would you say that the education department can change its policy in a manner that would empower leadership at schools?
The problem is that I think we have lots of lovely policies, but they remain policies on paper. If you look at the language and education policy, it's a wonderful policy, but it's not being implemented anyway. So I wrote a paper called Enabling Policies, Disabling Practices. So I think it's the practices that we need to focus on. And I don't think we need to expect manna from heaven in terms of the department, whether it's a provincial department or the national department. I think we need to start at the school level. And I think we have enough expertise at the school level to be able to change things. But there's a tendency to think somebody else must do it. So when I was a dean, for example, when an opportunity came and I would throw it open to everybody and I say, here's an opportunity to be part of a project called Tuning Africa, which involves the European Union and the African Union to try and harmonize programs across Africa in 5 areas. And one of the areas was teacher education. Nobody wanted to. I was quite busy at the time, so I wasn't able to do it. Nobody wanted to take it up. But I had what I called champions in the faculty. So I approached one of the champions and I said, won't you draft something and then I'll take it from there. The champion did it and I fine-tuned it and we got the project. We were the only education faculty in South Africa that was part of that project, you see. So one needs to look at ways in which to get people moving besides kicking them on the butt.
Shakira.
My question is for Mama Zana. I wanted to ask, I work on a national reading campaign, and whenever we look at the stats, the reading stats in South Africa are very poor. And we often find that parents in South Africa have the perception that the child needs to develop a love for reading at the school, that it's the teacher's responsibility to instill that in the child. But for me, that stat also brings about a bigger conversation about what is the responsibility of the parent and what is the responsibility of the teacher. And I'm of the opinion that basic things like respect and manners and lots of other qualities should come from the home, and it's not necessarily the teacher's responsibility to instill that. But that there should be a very strong connection between the parents and the teachers. So my question is, in an environment like where you are teaching, where parents are often working multiple jobs, are very busy, and as a result of their lifestyles are maybe sometimes disengaged from the school and what's happening there and what's happening with the child, how do you as a teacher get the parents to help children, with their homework or come to school activities and just be more intimately involved with the school? And how do you think that as school leaders, particularly in environments like in the township and in public schools, we can encourage more parent participation?
Thank you so much, Subeda. Okay, with starters, we teachers from the state schools, we are already overloaded, but we want now to involve the parents. What happens is that we've got a lot of, and I want to highlight that in this house, we've got a lot of expectations from the department where in such a small space of time, they want us to push so much for the learners, whether they understand or not. To the extent that I long for the olden days where when I started teaching, I was sure of a learner that is out of my class. The learner can count, read, and write his name. But up to grade 5, I can still find a learner that cannot write, that is not fully prepared, even though we've got preschools now. So what I think we can do for the parents to be involved, it's like at times to invite parents that are available locally to come to school and read stories to the learners, because my belief is that you start from the known to the unknown. If learners can be taught to be familiar with what is happening around their areas, we get those parents to help and ask the learners to tell us about news that were happening in their areas. So those parents can share that with the parents that are at work, and also we go back to the initiative of my child is your child. When I was at school, when I used to have homework in the area where I stay, I'll be sharing my homework with a group of learners that are either a grade ahead of me or are at the same grade with me. Also, we can give out or hand out extracts to parents when it is parents' meeting, where parents are told that the learners must be less on TV, but mostly in the olden days, like they open up radio, because the other problem that I as a teacher experience is that I got learners that are that speaks a lot more than listening. More than listening. What causes that? It's because our learners are sitting unattentively but just watching the TV. Also, I think in another manner, we can ask the parents to use those local newspapers and ask the learners, even if it's not reading the words, but through picture, seeing there are city visions, there are Vukani, that's what we were doing in the olden days. I used to read for grannies in the area. They would say, I must read Imvo Zabansund, what is happening? Then I'll be current. But I really want to say the reading is really, really down, not only because the teachers don't prescribe or don't give an article to the learners, but even from home. In the olden days, we used to write. I used to write letters that were going to the Eastern Cape. My uncle will say a lot of things, say this and this and this. Some of the words I'll just keep in the mind and not write everything. I think really if we can involve the parents to socialize with their children. We do those short telegrams, SMS, even if the children use phones, send a message to your aunt. And then the child, after the mother have said, tell aunt this and this and this, can you read for me the message? Because now it's technologically advanced, but parents need to be involved, and then it will depend in the area. Because even in some areas there are now free Wi-Fis and so forth, but really the standard of reading is very, very low. Thank you.
Thank you. I just want to add to that, in the sense that we need to think beyond the nuclear family, as you're saying. We all grew up in extended families. I grew up, for example, in a house with 2 bedrooms with 17 other people. My grandmother, her children, their spouses, and their children. And of the 18 of us, 10 have passed on, the previous generation, and there are 8 of us left. Of the 8, 1 is married in Johannesburg, 7 live in Cape Town. We get together every Saturday before the lockdown for lunch. The spouses, the children, the children's children. And so there are enough people to read stories. And there are enough opportunities to read as well. I mean, there's Nali Bali, for example, which looks at telling stories. There's African Storybook Project, and there's stories in all languages, you see. So the facilities are there. We just need able, willing young people to do the reading. It doesn't have to be the parents only, you see. And there's a story that my mother read to us, spoke to me without reading it. it was a story in Marathi. It's a language that I first learned to speak, an Indian language. But my mother couldn't write in any language, nor could I write Marathi. And that story is about 3 mangoes and the 3 sisters. I tell that story to my great niece and my great nephew. They love the story. So now I've written it in English, and we produced a chapter on that in a book called Early Childhood Literacy Development. If you give me your details, I will send you the book because it's open access. Thank you.
Also, if I can add, Shakira, when you asked Mama Zama about this holy triangle in education, parent, teacher, child. That was drummed into us in our, not my PGCE at UCT, but in the Teachers League of South Africa, of which I was a member at the same time I was doing my PGCE. So I got these ideas about what constitutes a holistic education, some of it from formal education, some of it from books, some of it from the home, some of it from these wonderful teacher mentors who were part of this organization. And perhaps this is something I can pose to all 3 of you. We've spoken about where our ideas for leadership comes from, from these different kinds of sources. But for me, in the school setting, perhaps the most powerful source of our notion of good leadership is from a teacher we've admired. And I had a few great teachers. And it's this teacher as a modeling makes me think that every teacher is a leader. Because not so much what you're saying as what you're doing and how you are in that classroom, which cauterizes itself on the child's being forever and forever. So who was the inspirational teacher or leader that you came across in the course of your work or life? Was there such a person? Was it a few people? I mean, you've spoken about the Montessori.
There can be negative examples as well. I remember vividly my standard 3 teacher who told the class, as I said, we grew up in a very small home, we were poor, and my jersey was torn at the elbows. The teacher tells the class, die motte het arme dessa uit sy jersey, sy trui opgeëet. And everybody burst out laughing. And I said to myself, when I become a teacher, I will never insult a child. Because that remark has stayed with me. So much so that I'm always looking at my jersey to see if it's torn. So there's that. I can't actually think of a teacher that shaped me, I find I was shaped a lot by books. I read voraciously. There was a mobile library that came to Salt River where I was born. And every fortnight it came. I had a cousin who was my age. He took out 3 books. I took out 3 books. We read the 6 books in the 2 weeks. And that's how I learned a lot. And that's what I try to do in my classes as well, to give the children stories and then to imagine themselves as the one or the other character, to gain that empathy, to gain that fairness. It's through storytelling, you see.
Zana, you want to say something to that? Okay, we're going to start to wind up. I'm going to ask you all to compose in your head some final thoughts on the question of school leadership. What would you say? There are hundreds of people out there watching you. What's your wisdom from your experience, limited or extended, about this question of leadership in schools? I want to perhaps end off my thinking on this. I'll do it now. I was going to do it right at the end because I thought this was a nice way to end this discussion. The source of inspiration for me, besides good teachers, besides, other at the home, political mentors. Another source were these political revolutionaries in our day. And one of them was, and many of them for me were poets. And one of the poets was a young Guatemalan revolutionary called Otto Rene Castillo. And Otto Rene Castillo, all his life as a student and an adult, fought against dictatorship in Guatemala and was killed by those very dictators at the young age of 33. But if anything moved me, body, mind, and soul, it was poetry that came from people who played these leading social roles. And I'll just read you two short verses from a poem of Otto Rene Castillo called Even Beneath This Bitterness. And I read it because I think it's inspirational about roles we can and should play in our workplaces and beyond. But I don't shut up and I don't die. I live and fight, maddening those who rule my country. For if I live, I fight. And if I fight, I contribute to the dawn. How can we all, each one of us, using our capacity, because each one of us, I feel I'm starting to sound like a preacher. Each one of us has that capacity for leadership. Is it not so? What brings it out and how? And this is the question I want to leave everybody with. And then I'll stop and I'm going to give the last word to the three panelists from each of their sides. I want to say, how can you, how can I, how can you, how can we contribute to the dawn? I'm going to start in reverse order. Maybe final few words from you, Kyle, then go to Zubaida and end with you, Nomazana.
Thank you, Sean. I think if I had to end off based on everything that has been spoken about today, I think that in the school setting, actually everywhere, pioneering in society, I think that is a major attribute to have. Don't follow in the same monotonous footsteps of the past. Create your own footsteps. Be bold, take that risk. I've taken many risks in my schooling career alone, and it's all paid off wonderfully. But I would never have known unless I took the risk. And that also, it links back to leadership. I was one of the first to do certain courses and programs in our school, and the youngest generations all observe and if they see that it's been beneficial to you, they will follow. So I think being a bit of a risk taker, trying new things, that is what I think our future needs to be. Thank you.
Thank you, Kyle.
For me, the word is hope. We are living, young people are living in a world where they think there is no hope. They're stuck in this particular setting and they're going to die in that setting. So for me, a good leader has to show them, inspire them to think that there are other ways of doing things. And I think teachers can play an important role in bringing out the potential in young people. It's amazing how teachers can play that kind of role. And I think that's what we need to do. Just show them the opportunities. I'll give you an example. In 2013, I was interviewed by a magazine called Post Matric. It's given out free of charge to all matriculants. And every year they have an inspirational story or two. In 2013, myself and Randall Abrams were the two inspirational persons. And I gave some advice to young people. And I had an email from a young student, a matriculant in the Eastern Cape, who was contemplating suicide and read my interview and said, I have given her hope.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. With me, it will be empowering the children, and also to encourage them that they must believe in themselves, especially the learners that are from the state schools, from the area where I teach. They lose hope. They don't believe in themselves. You know, when I grew up, I used even to pride myself about being poor. I did not pity myself. And I like what he mentioned, back to schools. I think it needs to be visited, the issue of values, morals, because what inspires and interests the young ones that we teach in the areas is to see the lifestyle that is coming easy. Those things, I think, are killing the true values, ethical values, because nowadays even there is no, people are not religiously conscious. When I grew up, we were taught biblically that in Xhosa we say the 10 Commandments, where I'm not supposed to steal, don't wish for something that is not yours. But from an early age, our learners don't have morals. Even that, with me, it bothers me that it has been taken away. The things of, even if it's which religion, I'm not saying Christianity is up there. We need what I can come out here to give that confidence to the learners, to appreciate themselves. They must be encouraged to believe in themselves. And also, teachers can teach at an early age the issue of delegating work and appreciate learners. We are differently gifted. I know the theory of Montessori because when I was trained as a teacher, that's what I used to like. Things there are done practically. There's a lot of things that has been taken out of I'm raising this, out of our curriculum. We used to do handwork. That's why I said I was poorly proud of myself, because my father taught me that you need to be clean. Oh, those basic things are not there at school. Really, myself, I don't know from the curriculum what must the learners learn. It's something that cannot sustain them. So if we as teachers can go back to learners and appreciate the gifts, the abilities, the capabilities that they've had. I loved what you've said, Zubide, when you said you had there a poster, whatever a person can write, how he or she feels for the day. I've got learners that from Crossroads have been identified, but that were not raised out of the system of education, but who have talent, because this boy was noticed that he's a good soccer player. There's no more sport. We used to have sports day on Wednesday where learners played. So this young boy, Aluta, was identified by the American students, how he kicked the balls. Today, he's been helped. He's at Randebosch High School. One of our learners from Old Cross Road, Amahle Zenzile, a skill that is not taught by the school, but that comes outside. She's a good chess player. She's now presently at Curo. Like, if those things that were teachers can unearth from the learners, I think it can be better. Now there's one boy also who've been taken by Drakensberg boys from Old Cross Road, not the school, but the boy or the parents of the boy saw this article. They want boys from 9 to 14-year-olds that if you can sing and so forth, because of his voice. But mostly, really, I'm saying and preaching to teachers, if we can empower, appreciate, encourage our learners with what they have and said, you can do it, believe, because most of our learners really, they are, and especially with the condition of the country. count myself. I've also got lots of doubt, and especially now because of this COVID issue.
Thank you. Thank you, Nombulazana. Thank you, Zubaida. Thank you, Carl. They deserve a round of applause.
So to end the session, I want to say thank you to the live audience. It's the first time we do this since March, where we bring people into a space where we can commune person to person. So it's quite a unique experience for us, given that all the critical dialogue we've run this year has been via the screen, via using Zoom. And so today we have what we call a hybrid approach, where we're using both a virtual broadcast of this particular panel discussion, as well as a live audience. And so it's a learning experience for us. We're very glad that you could tune in, and we're very grateful to the people who made an effort to brave the challenges of COVID-19 and come into a space where we could observe all the protocol and make sure that we still stay safe while at the same time continue the process of being in community with each other. Tonight, we continue at 7 o'clock with the state of leadership in South Africa. That's going to be a very, very interesting discussion, I can assure you. And that will be a virtual event, and it will be broadcast at 7 o'clock. So please tune in on Facebook or YouTube for that wonderful discussion that we got scheduled for you for this evening. And then, of course, we continue tomorrow and again on Saturday. And then finally, thanks to this amazing panel, the diversity of the panel, intergenerational, people with very wide-ranging experiences have come to share with us their perspective. And thanks to you, Sean, for putting a different spin on how it is that we're looking at leadership. And I think all of us can take at least one gem away from what it is that the panelists shared with us today. And we're very, very grateful for that. Thank you, everybody, and goodbye. See you tonight.